Welcome to the 2020 Pierce Performance presented by the Associates of the Boston Public Library. I'm Margot Newman, co-chair of the Pierce Performance Committee and a member of the board of the Associates. Thank you all for joining us. The mission of the Associates is to make grants to help preserve and protect the remarkable treasures that reside in the library's special collections. These hundreds of thousands of items include illuminated medieval manuscripts, letters and libraries of our nation's founders, exquisite prints, stunning photographs, works of history and works of art, and so much more. The Pierce Performance Series debuted 2 years ago as the result of a generous gift from the Harold Whitworth Pierce Charitable Trust. Each year, the series will seek to shine a light on some of the special collections. This year, we're highlighting the library's extensive abolitionist and anti-slavery holdings. For the past decade, the Associates of the BPL has been proud to support the conservation, cataloging, and digitizing of items from this important collection, helping to ensure that they're preserved for future generations and that they're made widely available to scholars, students, and interested citizens as a source of knowledge and perspective regarding a critical time in our nation's history. In the late 1890s, the family of renowned abolitionist William Lloyd Garrison, along with others closely involved in the movement for abolition at that time, presented the BPL with correspondence, documents, and other original material relating to the abolitionist cause. The 40,000 items in the collection date from the 1820s through the Civil War and Emancipation and continue up to the early 1880s. Represented in the collection are many well-known and influential American abolitionists such as Garrison, the Weston sisters, Lydia Maria Child, Theodore Parker, Frederick Douglass, Robert Purvis, and Sojourner Truth, along with others less familiar today. The collection is, of course, not fully representative of the abolitionist movement. There are many more letters by white authors than those who were black or people of color. The letters in the collection, for the most part, come from the pens of people with privilege, and most of the writers had the advantage of an education not available to all, or even many, at that time. Also, the letters we're sharing tonight do not fully represent everything in the BPL's collection. While they touch on the passions and experiences of the men and women who wrote them, they don't explore the dizzying range of issues the movement confronted. Even within the movement, there were significant disagreements on many issues. For example, should emancipation be immediate or gradual? Should formerly enslaved people receive compensation? Should the right to vote, at least for men, accompany emancipation? Should individuals boycott goods produced within slave labor? Tonight's performance is meant to provide a glimpse into the experience of 5 individuals at a moment in time in our history that continues to impact us today. We hope through this imperfect lens, we might inspire some of you to begin to do your own research using this vast collection to see what people and issues you might discover. The Associates underwrote the conservation of the physical letters and their digitization. So we are tremendously grateful to the students of the Boston Arts Academy who will bring these letters from the collection to life, giving voice to sentiments that are more than 160 years old and helping us to understand their meaning. These talented actors and actresses will be sharing with you the words of William Lloyd Garrison, Amos Augustus Phelps, Lydia Maria Child, Frederick Douglass, and Sojourner Truth. The letters the students are reading take us on a journey in time from 1831, when Garrison founded his abolitionist newspaper, The Liberator, here in Boston, through the Civil War. We are deeply grateful as well to Artists for Humanity who helped create this beautiful video presentation of the letters. Now it is my pleasure to introduce Professor Kellie Carter Jackson, the NAFL Assistant Professor of the Humanities in the Department of Africana Studies at Wellesley College. Her book, Force and Freedom, Black Abolitionists and the Politics of Violence, won the James H. Broussard Best First Book Prize, is a finalist for the Frederick Douglass Book Prize, and a finalist for the Museum of African American History Stone Book Prize. It's also included among 13 books to read on African American history by the Washington Post. She's also co-editor of Reconsidering Roots, Race, Politics, and Memory, and her essays have been featured many places, including the Washington Post, the Atlantic, the Los Angeles Times, NPR, Time, and The Conversation, among many others.
Why do the abolitionists matter? Do we even have to ask this question? Yes, the abolitionists created the groundwork and the blueprint for understanding social and political movements. They are both patriots and prophets. As patriots, they love this country enough to call out its oppression and unjust ways. As prophets, they predicted a better, freer future. The end of slavery was about human rights, and for Black abolitionists, it was a twofold mission that required immediate emancipation and unmitigated equality. In the letters that will be presented to you today, we have the chance to hear the words of passionate people, men and women who risked their lives and their livelihood in their commitment that all men and women might be free. Today, you will hear from William Lloyd Garrison, Amos Augustus Phelps, Lydia Maria Child, Frederick Douglass, and Sojourner Truth. These men are writing from the convictions of their heart and passion of their youth. All writing in their 20s, Garrison, Phelps, and Douglass were full of angst and optimism. Conversely, Child and Truth are women writing from a place of wisdom. In or near their 60s, they have seen the movement evolve and pivot. And while writing these letters, Truth and Child are living through America's deadliest war. Each letter tells us something different, but keeps a common theme: urgency, commitment, conviction, and camaraderie. William Lloyd Garrison is best known for his widely read anti-slavery newspaper, The Liberator. He was one of the founders of the American Anti-Slavery Society and promoted immediate emancipation of the enslaved of the United States of America. In 1834, Garrison's Liberator had 2,000 subscribers, and 3/4 of them were Black Americans. Few white people championed for emancipation with the conviction of Garrison. His letter is from his initial essay in the first volume of The Liberator. At the time he wrote these words, Garrison was just 26 years old. His critique is cutting and urgent. He spared no one except the enslaved. His entire letter might be summed up in one neat slogan: freedom now. Amos Augustus Phelps joined the American Anti-Slavery Society in 1834. And from 1837 to 1839, he served as the general agent of the Massachusetts Anti-Slavery Society. In 1839, he left that society to become one of the founding members of the Massachusetts Abolition Society, formed by abolitionists who disagreed with William Lloyd Garrison's progressive and sometimes radical politics. It is believed that Phelps's letter was written in 1834 when he was likely 29 years old and serving as a congregational pastor. His letter is not intended to talk about sins, but solutions. He demands that slaveholders relinquish their grip on Black people and remedy the damage they have caused. But of all the abolitionists, Frederick Douglass is by far the most famous. We now know him to be the most photographed person of all the 19th century. Born enslaved on the eastern shore of the Chesapeake Bay in Talbot County, Maryland, Douglass managed to escape the bondage of slavery and remarkably give his first anti-slavery speech in Nantucket, Massachusetts. In 1846, writing to his friend Francis Jackson, at about age 28, Douglass is discussing his trip to Scotland. Imagine Douglass, all the way from the eastern shore of Maryland, now traveling the world. Douglass's letter is a testament to friendship. The work of an activist and an abolitionist cannot be done in isolation. We have often underestimated the level of intimate friendships involved in the making of movements. The abolitionist fight required camaraderie. Lydia Maria Child was an American abolitionist, a women's rights activist, a Native American activist, a novelist, and a journalist. Her letter, written in 1861, reminds readers, even in the middle of a war, that the work of the abolitionists is not done. As a fundraising letter, it asks donors of the Old World to contribute to support anti-slavery efforts in America. Child clearly saw the war as a war to end slavery, an opportunity to finally, once and for all, abolish the institution. Finally, Sojourner Truth was an American abolitionist and women's rights activist. Truth was born into slavery in New York, but escaped with her infant daughter to freedom in 1826. After going to court to recover her son in 1828, she became the first Black woman to win such a case against a white man. This letter was written in 1864 to her good friend, William Lloyd Garrison. Truth has learned that a collection has been taken up to honor the abolitionist George Thompson, and she wishes to add to the cause. Once again, friendship is a theme in these letters. Support of one another was an incalculable currency. She tells the story of a speaking tour she went on 7 years earlier with Thompson to promote her narrative. She never forgot his generosity. In the world we live in today, it is easier for students to understand a recent past, one with video footage and photography, a past they can pull up on YouTube or tweet to a friend. But the 19th century calls us to go back further, to be satisfied, if not stirred, by the power of a well-written letter. Letters were currency. Letters could be both political and personal. Letters could inform and inspire. These letters do this work. I hope you will listen to each letter with a mind toward the movement, the abolitionist movement.
I determined, at every hazard, to lift up the standard of emancipation in the eyes of the nation within sight of Bunker Hill and in the birthplace of liberty. The standard is now unfurled, and long may it float, unhurt by spoliations of time or the missiles of a desperate foe. Yea, till every chain be broken and every bondman set free. Let southern oppressors tremble. Let their secret abettors tremble. Let their northern apologists tremble. Let all the enemies of the persecuted blacks tremble. Assenting to the self-evident truth, maintain the American Declaration of Independence, that all men are created equal and endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, among which are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. I shall strenuously contend for the immediate enfranchisement of our slave population. In Park Street Church of the 4th of July, 1829, in an address on slavery, I unreflectingly assented to the popular but pernicious doctrine of gradual emancipation. I seized this opportunity to make full and unequivocal recantation and thus publicly to ask pardon of my God, of my country, and of my brethren, the poor slaves, for having uttered a sentiment so full of timidity, injustice, and absurdity. My conscience is now satisfied. I am aware that many object to the severity of my language. But is there not cause for severity? I will be harsh as truth and as uncompromising as justice on the subject. I do not wish to think or speak or write with moderation. No! Tell a man whose house is on fire to give moderate alarm. Tell him to moderately rescue his wife from the hands of the ravisher. Tell the mother to gradually extricate her babe from the fire into which it has fallen. But urge me not to use moderation in a cause like the present. I am in earnest. I will not equivocate. I will not excuse. I will not retreat a single inch, and I will be heard. The apathy of the people is enough to make every statue leap from its pedestal and to hasten the resurrection of the dead. It is pretended that I'm retarding the cause of emancipation by the coarseness of my invective and the precipitancy of my measures. But the charge is not true. On this question of my influence, humble as it is felt at this moment to a considerable extent, and shall be felt in coming years, not perniciously, but beneficially, not as a curse, but as a blessing. And posterity will bear testimony that I was right. I desire to thank God that He enables me to disregard the fear of a man which bringeth a snare, and to speak as truth in simplicity and power. And here I close with this fresh dedication. Oppression! I have seen thee face to face, and met thy cruel eye and cloudy brow. But thy soul withering glance I fear not now. From dread to prouder feelings thou give place. of deep abhorrence, scorning the disgrace of slavish knees at that thy footst thou bow. I also kneel, but with far other vow, to hail thee and thy herd of hireling base. I swear, where life blood warms through my throbbing veins, still to oppose and thwart, with heart and hand, thy brutalizing sway, till Afric's chains are burst and freedom rules the rescued land, trampling oppression and his iron rod. Such is the vow I take, so help me God.
My dear friend Jackson, I've been long promising myself the pleasure of sending you a line from this side of the sea, but I've been compelled to deny myself in consequence of immediate and pressing engagements here. If you demand an apology for the liberty I am now about to take, I beg you to do which I feel confident you are solemnly inclined to do. Namely, look towards myself and the people with whom I am identified. These acts justify me in thinking you will not object to having a line from me. From the first day I stepped out of obscurity on the anti-slavery platform at Nantucket to the day I stepped on the deck of the Cambria. For these shores, you stood by me, to encourage, strengthen, and defend me from the assaults of my foes and the foes of my race. I will not trouble you with any eulogy, for I know such would be disagreeable to your ears, but you must allow me to tell you that your acts are not forgotten. When I was a stranger, rough, unpolished, judged from the bellows handle in Richmond's brass foundry in New Bedford, when I was regarded and treated as a being to be despised, when I was scarce able to write 2 sentences of the English language correctly, you took me into your drawing room, welcomed me to your table, put me in your best bed, and treated me in every way an equal brother. These things I still remember, and it affords now great pleasure to speak of them. Pardon me for reminding you of these things now. I am writing now, as you perceive by the date of this letter, in old Scotland. Almost every hill, river, mountain, and lake of which has been made classic by the heroic deeds of her noble sons, scarcely a stream but what has been poured into song, or a hill that is not associated with some fierce and bloody conflict between liberty and slavery. I had a view the other day of what are called the Grampian Mountains, that divide East Scotland from the west. I was told that here the ancient crowned heads used to meet, contend, and struggle in deadly conflicts for supremacy, causing those grand old hills to run blood, each warming cold steel in the other's heart. My soul sickens at the thought. Yet I see in myself all those elements of character which, were I to yield to their prompting, might lead me to deeds as bloody as those at which my soul now sickens, and from which I now turn with disgust and shame. Thank God liberty is no longer to be contended for, and gained by the instrument of death. A higher, a nobler, a mightier than carnal weapon is placed in our hands, one which hurls defiance at all the improvements of carnal warfare. It is the righteous appeal of the understanding and the heart. With this, we can withstand the most fiery of all the darts of perdition itself. I see that America is boasting of her naval and military power. Let her boast. She may build her walls and forts, making them proof against ball and bomb, but while there is a voice in her midst to charge home the duty of emancipation, neither her army or her navy can protect her from the gnawing of a guilty conscience.
I have already spoken of the sin of slavery. I come now to the question of remedy. And here let me say that the time has evidently come when the subject is to undergo a new and thorough investigation among all classes of the community. Men are springing up in every section of the lane, men too who are not to be cashiered as babblers or, in the parlance of modern philosophers, as visionary enthusiasts, reckless incendiaries, etc. Men whose sentiments are not to be set aside or sneered out of existence as being the result of fanaticism and overheated zeal, who tell that their former views upon the subject have been wrong, radically wrong, and some new and more efficient means of remedy must speedily be adopted. They have re-investigated the subject. They have done so with fervent prayer for guidance from on high, and they have come to results at variance, or at least in advance of their former views. They now regard the matter of slaveholding as a sin, not merely in abstraction of theory, but in actual and present practice. They are beginning to preach and print and talk of it as a sin, and laugh at them as it may, the whole community feels the effect thereof. Attention is awakened, discussion is elicited, the right kind of discussion too, not merely of apology. The press and the pulpit are speaking, and the time has gone by when the subject of slavery and its remedy can avoid the light or escape the scrutiny of strict and general examination. The community will not and cannot be lulled to sleep much longer with cries of hush, hush, careful, careful. Nor will it much longer be imposed on by cries of fanatic, incendiary, firebrand, etc. on the one hand, or be frightened by the other, by cries of danger, insurrection, blood. On the contrary, it will claim the right of seeing for itself on the subject. And if it be true indeed that slavery has grown to such frightful maturity as that remedy is out of the question and we therefore are a ruined people, the community will insist on knowing it. Or, if there be yet a remedy, the community will insist on knowing what it is and on its speedy application. The subject cannot escape a thorough and rigid investigation. But, to the question of remedy, what is it? I remark, 1, that whatever it be, it is to be determined on general principles and not on the supposition of expected cases. How much reasoning there is of this kind on this subject, you need not be told. One can hardly whisper the doctrine of immediate emancipation, but he is met at once by the supposition of some extreme case in which it is always taken for granted that such emancipation would be certain ruin to both the master and the slave. And then, starting with this extreme case, the creature of interest, or a panic-struck imagination, by which all sorts of frightful things are conjured up, starting with this as a fair representation of the slave-holding community generally, and correct basis of reasoning, it is gravely inferred that such emancipation cannot be duty. Was ever reasoning more absurd? And farther, it ought to be understood that in applying the remedy, whatever it be, most men would have sense enough not to apply it to the worst case first. And so, in this case, in applying the doctrine of immediate emancipation, we do not intend to apply it to the worst case first. We propose to first go to the slaveholder whose mind is most open to conviction, and whose case there are fewest obstacles to emancipation, fewest difficulties, and fewest dangers, and ply his conscience with the doctrine. And when we have succeeded with him, we propose to go to another, and ply his conscience, and add to all our other motives the example of his neighbor, and so on. And if in the end we find some extreme cases that do not admit the possibility of remedy without the direful results anticipated, all we can do is meet them and let the individual die in his sin, rather than abandon general principles and thus sacrifice public to private good. Our business is with the public, and therefore the scheme of remedy that is best for the public as a whole operates hardly here and there on the individual. It is indeed to be regretted, but nevertheless we must abide by general principles. It is better one member perish than the whole body be cast to hell. I remark again, 2, that the remedy, whatever it be, must respect the rights and interests of the injured in preference to those of the injurers. This is demonstrated on every principle of justice and humanity. If the case in respect to slavery is a desperate one, so there is no alternative but the rights and interests of one or the other must be sacrificed, then I hesitate not to affirm that those of the master must yield to those of the slave. If there be no remedy in the case save one that shall compromise, in whole or in part, the interests and rights of one or the other, then it is clear that that party should suffer which is in the wrong. nor will it answer for the slaveholder to say in reply that the state of society in which he finds himself is not of his own choosing, that the evil of slaveholding, it is entailed on him and is his misfortune and not his crime. If it be so, he is bound to bear it as his, and it is only adding insults to injury to attempt to throw it off from himself upon his poor slave. The slave's own cup is filled with bitterness. He has much misfortune of his own as he can well bear. The master has no right to add it to his. If it be his calamity, he must meet it as his and not screen himself and not redeem his misfortunes at the expense of his already too much injured slave.
It is true that the nation is aroused as never before, and that a more intelligent perception exists than at any previous time of the true character of slavery and the certain destruction it will bring upon this people if itself suffered to live. But this is far from the universal conviction, nor has the government any apparent purpose as yet of seizing the opportunity which Providence is affording us to bring this monstrous wrong and curse of slavery to an end. We see, therefore, that the anti-slavery work is by no means yet done, and that we must not yet abandon an instrumentality which has commended itself to all friends of the cause for upwards of a quarter century as alike necessary and efficient. At this late day, and in this momentous crisis of our country, when the mighty question of liberty or slavery for man hangs in doubtful scale, in the anxious sight of all lovers of justice and humanity, it cannot be necessary that we should restate to you our cause, its meaning, spirit, purpose, or vindicate its necessity and beneficent results. It is enough that we, American abolitionists of a 30 years moral war, present it to you, its long-tried friends and supporters in the old world, as the same cause in whose behalf you have labored through so many years and so many discouragements. Our methods of operation, too, and the weapons of our warfare, the same they have ever been. Our trust is in the justice and righteousness of our cause. Our hope for victory is solely in God. In the might of his truth we labor, and in that strength we shall conquer. But our country is plunged in civil war, the result of the ambition and desperation of the slave-holding states. Our people and government have been forced into a contest which they have long and ever sought to avoid, often by concessions of the most humiliating nature. Now they seek to save the government with whatever is left of freedom and justice among us from the rebel and murderous assaults of men who design to establish in this Western world a slave-holding empire of the most unmitigated despotism. We cannot fail to recognize in this very antagonistic position strong proof that the spirit of liberty, awakened and educated by the abolitionist, has spread wide and deep in the Northern heart. The Executive Committee of the American Anti-Slave Society have already set on foot a petition to Congress for signature by the people, or in that body to assemble early in December. It is urgently implored to lose no time in acting under the war power, the total abolition of slavery throughout the country, liberating unconditionally the slaves of all who are rebels, and while not recognizing the right of property in man, allowing the emancipated slaves of such as are loyal to the government a fair pecuniary award in order to facilitate an amicable adjustment of difficulties, and thus to bring the war to a speedy and beneficent termination, and indissolubly to unite all sections and all interests of the country upon the enduring basis of universal freedom. This is our immediate work. We regard the proposed measure as the only basis of true and honorable peace, and are confident that this policy will accomplish the highest good and the enduring prosperity alike of North and South, of free man and of slave, that it will save the lives of thousands now, lift up millions into the possession of their divine birthright, change their tears and groans into songs of thanksgiving, and command for our whole land the favor and blessings of Him, under whose righteous judgments we are now deservedly suffering. Friends, help us to accomplish these glorious ends. Help us, as all lovers of justice and freedom the world over may most effectually do, to banish the foul fiend slavery from our land. And remember, in our recorded vows in liberty's service, let us never turn back from her holy work, until all nations shall rejoice together in the possession of this gift of heaven.
Hope you never feel the torment I know. Hope you never share my sorrow.
Mr. Garrison, my dear friend, I've just been hearing of the subscription testimonial to George Thompson. I hope the Friends of Liberty and the Union will pour out to him a cup of blessing, full and running over. My heart is glowing just now at the remembrance of his kindness to me in 1857. I've been publishing my narrative and owe for the whole edition, a great debt for me. Every cent I could obtain went to pay it. You said to me, I'm going with George Thompson on a lecturing tour. Come with us and we'll have a good chance to dispose of your book. I replied that I had no money. You generously offered to bear any expenses, and it was arranged that I should meet you in Springfield. On the appointed day, I was there, but you were not at the hotel. I inquired for Mr. Thompson and was showed into his room. He received and seated me with so much courtesy and cordiality as if I had been the highest lady in the land, informing me that you were too ill to leave home, but if I would go with himself and Mr. Putnam, it would all be the same. But, said I have no money, and Mr. Garrison offered to pay my passage. I'll bear any expenses, Sojourner, said he. Leave with us. And so I went. He accompanied me to the cars and carried my bag. At the hotel tables, he seated me beside himself and never seemed to know that I was poor and a black woman. At the meeting, he recommended my books. Sojourner Truth has a narrative of her life. 'Tis very interesting. Buy largely, friends. Good man, genuinely gentleman. God bless George Thompson, a great-hearted friend of my race. Many have been kind to me. Among others, yourself, Oliver Johnson, Garrett Smith, Dr. Boyle, and Mr. Hill. When I think of you all, a great blessing swells my soul. It only amounts to empty things here. But when I reach my Father's house, I'll return you full measure heaped up and running over. Mr. Garrison, you say that small sums will be welcome for this testimonial. The more that participate, the better. I want to enclose a little. My mite, just have a hand in it. So, I enclose $2, made from my shadow. Put it in beside Garrett Smith's 200. That will make 202. Your friend, Sojourner Truth. P.S. Mr. Thompson once promised me his picture. Will you tell him that I would be very glad to receive it? Perhaps he would like to see old Sojourner once more. So, I enclose my shadow. Movements are marathons. If someone had told William Lloyd Garrison, Amos Augustus Phelps, Frederick Douglass, Lydia Maria Child, and Sojourner Truth that in 1831 it would be another 30 years until all of the enslaved living in the United States would be free, would they still do the work? Would they work all the more diligently, or would they become complacent, biding their time until the day arrived? What if someone told Amos Augustus Phelps that he would not live to see the day of the Emancipation Proclamation or the 13th Amendment? How invested would you be in a cause if you knew you would never live to see the fruits of your labor? Activists generally do not live to see their efforts come to fruition. Movements are not only marathons, they're relay races. Each leader, each abolitionist, and each activist plays a pivotal role in passing the baton and the work forward. Some strides are made up quickly, and some gains are lost in the mountainous climbs of justice. These leaders compel us to think about social and political movements and the endurance required to meet the challenges ahead. Consider this. In 1925, civil rights activist A. Philip Randolph organized and led the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters, the first predominantly African-American labor union. In 1941, Randolph proposed a march on Washington to protest racial discrimination and segregation. Randolph threatened to have 50,000 Black people march and descend on the nation's capital. The march never materialized. But 20 years later, in 1963, Randolph finally realized his vision for a march on Washington for jobs and for freedom. In 1963, the march attracted nearly 300,000 people to the nation's capital. One day before he saw his vision come to fruition, the renowned scholar, activist, author, and founding member of the NAACP, W.E.B. Du Bois, died. At 95 years old, nearly a century of life and decades of activism, Du Bois never lived to see many of the reforms he had championed so passionately for. In subsequent years after Du Bois's death, the United States government would pass the Civil Rights Act, the Voting Rights Act, and the Fair Housing Act as groundbreaking legislative progress. Today, we are in the midst of another movement, the movement for Black Lives, which started in 2015 with the deaths of Michael Brown, Eric Garner, and Tamir Rice, along with so many, many others. Today, we wrestle with the questions of speed. How do marches and protests keep their momentum? What happens when the movement falls out of what's trending? Will we live to see the changes of reparations, economic justice, and an end to Black criminality and mass incarceration? Will it happen in our generation? Will it happen in our lifetime? Would you keep fighting even if you didn't live to see the changes? Just like the abolitionists, no one believed that the end of slavery was inevitable or just around the corner. Change doesn't just happen. They lived and labored and loved with a sense of urgency. They never quit or faltered in the face of setbacks. Even when leaders differed about directions, the destination was always the same: freedom. Today, you've heard powerful letters from leaders who were not fortune tellers. No, perhaps we might call them prophets. People who predicted a future that was possible and did not stop striving until that day arrived. It did not matter if they would live to see it. It only mattered that you, the future, did. May we all hope to live with the conviction of heart and strength of the abolitionists. May we all continue to work and write until freedom comes, whether we see it or not. Today, I'd like to thank the Pierce performers and the associates of the Boston Public Library for putting together this extraordinary program. We continue to be indebted to the tireless work of librarians, archivists, and ever grateful to the historians and artists who bring history to life and make it meaningful for the public. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Jackson, for that thoughtful context to these readings. And thank you especially to the remarkably talented young actors who so ably brought to life the voices of these abolitionists and the video producers who showed us what the letters and the art at the time looked like. The Associates is proud to host the Pierce Performance Series each year and extremely grateful for the generous gift that makes the annual series possible. If you would like to learn more about the Associates, please visit our website, associatesbpl.org, which you can see on the screen. If you enjoyed the presentation, please consider making a contribution to support our preservation and conservation work. Thank you so much for joining us.